Hi, I'm Vidhya Nagarajan, and I'm an illustrator and letterer, and I live in New York City. So you're going to hear car horns and sirens at some point in this video. So just bear with me. Sorry about that. Um, so as an illustrator, my work appears in many different forms, which is really cool for me when I get to see it in the wild. It is in newspapers, in magazines, on book covers, websites, packaging, um, and on the internet because I also make GIFs. Some of the publications I've been in are the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, on NPR, the Los Angeles Times, and also I've worked on book covers for Penguin Random House, and I've worked on GIFs for Giphy, which is, I think, the place for GIFs. I got my start as an illustrator by studying communication design in my undergraduate years. And communication design was really a mix of graphic design and illustration. And I think that's also where my interest in letters came about. Because I'm also a lettering artist. I'll write a headline for an article or a phrase. Sometimes I work on logos. And when I graduated college, I sent my work to a bunch of art directors. So this was, I guess this was, Instagram was around, but it hadn't really taken off the way it is now, where that's how most illustrators are promoting their work. Then what I would do is I would send out postcards of my work, postcards with images of my work and my contact information. And I would go to a bookstore like a Barnes and Noble, and I would look through every magazine on the rack, every newspaper, and see who was using illustrations. And then I would take that stack of publications and I would go to the masthead and look up who the art director was, look up where the address was, and write all that information down onto the postcards that I was sending out with my information. And then I would mail them out and wait and hear back, or in most cases not hear back from those art directors. It took me maybe 2 or 3 rounds of sending out postcards before I got my first illustration job. And I think, that time, the beginning for any illustrator, I think, is really difficult. You just don't know whether you are going to get a job, whether you're going to be able to, pay your bills. I mean, I still kind of worry about those things, but not as much as I did when I first started. I really honestly feel like if you are making quality work and working on your practice consistently and reaching out to people who can help you publish that work or help get your work out there consistently, then I feel like you are going to get jobs. There's just no denying really hard work and persistence. So I think that's something that I would tell my younger self. Like, you're doing everything right. You just have to be patient. So after I graduated, it took me, like I mentioned, a couple of rounds of sending out postcards before I got my first job. And even after that, I didn't get my next job till maybe like a month or 2 later. And then slowly I started building up a client list. And then those clients would come back to me and ask me to work for them again. And then sometimes different clients would see a publication and recognize my work or remember my name and then hire me for their publication. So it kind of snowballed to a point where I could get work pretty consistently. There's definitely still weeks where not a lot of work is coming in or no work at all is coming in. And I think that's normal. For freelancers of any profession, they always say when it rains, it pours. Either you're super busy and I have like 6 assignments to work on in a week, or nothing is going on, which really gives me time to work on personal projects or figuring out who else I want to work with and trying to find ways to connect with those people. So I want to talk about some of the ways that I make work. I make my work, I'm going to split it up into 4 different sections. So sometimes I make work that's completely traditional, meaning I don't use the computer at all, except for maybe to scan it in and to like clean up the image in the end. So when I work like that, it's usually for my sketchbook, and I'll only use like a brush pen or Posca markers, Posca paint pens, which I love. So this is a Posca paint pen. It's if you shake it up, you can hear the little ball that's in there. So it's just like a marker or a thin pen, but when you draw with it, it has that paint, like that thick paint qualities. So when you color something back and forth, you don't get the streaks that you would a marker, but it's just like a solid, flat field of color, which I really like because that's what I like about digital. I'm not interested in really having like variation in values or really having that like, I guess, watercolory feel of like layers of color. I just like it to be flat, consistent color. So with this, you can really get that quality. So when I travel, I really like to make these itineraries of my day. This is an example of a spread that I made while I was in Copenhagen. So I like to create this rule for myself for this particular project in my sketchbook. I usually have the name of the city lettered in the middle, little vignettes of things that I do throughout my day, and I only use one color. The lettering is really inspired by signage that I see or typography that's around the city. So here's one example. Here's another one. So I really find this to be satisfying, and it's a great way for me to remember what happened on that vacation or what happened on that trip, or record funny things that my friends say, or like little tidbits of information. It's kind of like just like a visual diary of my trips. So when I started doing this, I started putting it on my website, and slowly art directors started noticing this style and asked for this traditional style of working for their publication. This past year in 2020, the New York Times I had a short-lived column. It ended prematurely because of COVID, but they would send me all around New York City to different cultural events to record the event visually in this kind of style. So I went to a Broadway show. I went to the Westminster Dog Show, which was great. And I didn't really expect to get jobs out of this. It was just something that I did because I really enjoyed it. But I was so glad when other people started taking notice and asked for this style too. So that's one way that I make work. Another way I make work is half traditionally and then half digitally. So here's an example of something that I made for my MFA program when I went to School of Visual Arts. So this drawing was done on Bristol paper. It's like kind of thick. And then I would take a brush pen and draw my image just in black and white. And then I would scan this in and then change the line color and color in the image digitally. So that's the way I work most often, because I still like that tactile quality of having, pen to paper. But like I mentioned before, I really like the flat quality of color, just flat fields of color. So I think the computer is a really good way to do that. And then the third way that I work is 100% digitally, which during the pandemic, I was kind of moving from place to place a little bit, and I couldn't bring all of my supplies with me or I wasn't bringing that much stuff with me. I really wanted to condense my practice and not bring all my tools with me all over the place. So I would only work on my iPad, which is like a traditionally, the smaller iPad with an iPencil. And I work in Procreate. So this is a project that I worked on over the summer. It's a beer bottle for a gigantic brewing company. It's a company in Portland, Oregon. And so this was all done in Procreate. And they were a great company to work with because they just said, you can make anything you want. And so I kind of was like dreaming about, a vacation with friends and having some adventure. So I just drew that image and they loved it and they put it on a beer bottle. So that's a new, kind of a newer way that I'm starting to work more recently, is 100% digitally. And what's also great about working 100% digitally is it's a lot faster because I don't have to constantly scan in drawings and like fix them or clean things up. I can work really in layers on Procreate. So if I start with a sketch, I can kind of like reduce the opacity of that sketch and then draw over it a little bit tighter instead of like using all this tracing paper and frankly wasting a lot of paper. So I do like that part of it. I'm going to start incorporating that into also working 50% traditionally, 50% digitally. And then the fourth way that I make work is through Silkscreening. I really got into Silkscreening when I was doing my master's at SVA. One summer I audited a course on Silkscreening taught by David Sandlin, who is an illustrator as well as a silkscreen artist. And I really liked it because it really took all of your concentration. Because it's so technical and you really have to line things up perfectly and get things right and make sure all of your, supplies are in place, because time is really of the essence in silkscreen printing. Like when you put down ink and you like pull your first print, you can't just twiddle your thumbs and like check your phone or check your email in between. You have to really keep on going because otherwise the ink kind of dries out on your screen. So it was really, it was quick, but it also required you to be very technical. And I would spend an afternoon doing that, really only thinking about Silkscreening. So whatever other problems or, emails were waiting or other projects that I had to deal with, they were out of mind for like those few hours. So here's a framed silkscreen that I worked on. And I only really use Silkscreening for personal use. I sell silkscreens on my website, but nobody's ever commissioned me for a silkscreen. But maybe one day. One other thing that I wanted to talk about was having an agent. So before I had my agent, I was an illustrator just working completely by myself. Like I had mentioned before, I was reaching out to art directors by myself. I was getting clients. They would refer me to other people, or they would, I would have repeat clients, and I was having a okay time doing that. But when my agent reached out to me and asked if I was interested in having representation, and I thought, well, maybe this would be a good way to move my practice forward or to take some of the heat off of me. So what my agent does is she really is my business brain. She takes care of everything that I don't really want to think about. I am left to mainly just work on the illustrations for clients, which I'm very happy about. So she takes care of negotiating my payment. She'll negotiate hire for me. She will negotiate usage rights. She will step in if a client is really asking for too many revisions, more revisions than we initially agreed upon. She will read the contracts that the client provides and make sure there's no red flags. she'll invoice for me, and then she'll also promote my work. She'll help me promote my work. And she's a great person to have. It's just nice to have somebody else on your team really like looking out for you, so you're not just the only person doing that. But I think one common misconception about having an agent is that your agent just like magically gets all these clients for you and like you're never without work, which is not the case. She's great and she does get me clients, but she also is not a magician. I still have to do some promotion myself too. It's always better to have two people working towards one goal rather than just one. So she has her list of contacts that she'll email people about my work, but I also have my contacts, so I'll continue to promote myself or reach out to different art directors that I want to work with. So my agent and many agents will take 25% of your check from a client. So I know that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but in my opinion, it was worth it because she really just cuts down on the amount of things that I have to be thinking about. I realize that I don't work well when I'm under high alert or high stress, whether I'm wondering whether I price too high or low for a job, or if I have to think about like what kind of rights should this client get for this amount of money. I'd rather just have somebody else deal with all that stuff and have myself pay that, my agent a fee for that. I'm totally okay with it. It's not for everybody, which is understandable. Another thing with agents is usually for books and for advertising, those art directors usually like to go through an agent because an agent has a list of artists that are vetted. So I've been able to work with clients like Google and Apple, and I've made work for Penguin Random House, and all that stuff has come through my agent directly. So I'm going to take you through a process video for my label for a gigantic brewing company. So like I mentioned, the company was great to work with because they let me do whatever I wanted. And since I was in quarantine during the summer, I was really just daydreaming about seeing my friends and going on vacation. So that's how we arrived at all these ladies on a Vespa riding through the jungle. Which also worked out because the tasting notes for the beer were like mangoes and grapefruit and these tropical fruit flavor notes. So when I start an illustration, it really is a layering process of sketches. So I'll do a quick sketch and then I'll go over it and try to make it tighter and figure out where to put everything, like the lettering and how to push the background back in space and how to bring the foreground forward in space a little bit, what kind of lettering that I want to apply to the phrase or the words. And so, yeah, this is just me tightening it up, figuring out what I want the girls to be wearing, how I'm going to pull out the lettering so that it really stands out. And then after I get the sketch down, I'll draw it again one more time just to really tighten up the lines and make like final line art. And I will go over this as many as like 10 times because I really want every line to be just so. Which is another good thing about drawing on the iPad, because normally I would draw this 10 or 15 times traditionally and scan it in and look at it, and this really just cuts down time because scanning, as much as it shouldn't take a long time, it really does because scanners are slow. But yeah, so I really loved working on the background part of this. It was just really repetitive. I love to put on a podcast or an audiobook and just totally go crazy drawing like these mangoes and leaves. And I really wanted the girls to be wearing these fun jumpsuits because personally I do love wearing jumpsuits, but they're, if anybody knows, they are so hard to find a good one. So I was really just creating my kind of fantasy jumpsuit looks. I was also weirdly obsessed with Vespas over the summer. I've never owned a Vespa, but I kind of fantasized about buying one. I don't think it will ever happen. I think I would be too scared to ever ride one in the street. I mean, I don't even ride a bike. Over the summer, I tried to ride a bike and I got nervous. I couldn't do it. But that's the fun thing about illustration. You get to really live out your fantasies on paper or on screen. Yeah, so this is really just me, again, tightening it up. I've drawn this bird, as you can see, 3 or 4 times. And then I start to kind of play around with color a little bit. I know that I want certain shapes to be graphic black shapes because I really think that anchors the piece and gives it some weight. So you're always going to see that in my work. I knew I wanted it to be really bright, vibrant colors because usually that my work does have very bright colors, and I know it's going to be on a beer label. I really wanted to make sure that the artwork popped and that when people saw it on a shelf, they would want to buy it, because I know that when I go to a wine store or a liquor store, I really am attracted to the artwork. I am not going to buy a wine that just doesn't look great. That's just me. I know other people look for different things when they're buying alcohol or wine, but I really am looking at the label because I want it to be considered as much as anything else in the product would be considered.